Shadows of the Forgotten by Whimsical Tales. I've always been drawn to the unknown, the unexplained mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows of our world. It was this insatiable curiosity that led me to that fateful expedition, an adventure that I would soon regret. I set out that morning, with a backpack slung over my shoulder, a map in my hand, and a spirit full of excitement. The sun was high, casting a warm glow over the forest that bordered the small town I had been staying in. My plan was simple: to explore the dense woodland, following trails that were less traveled, in hopes of capturing some of nature's untouched beauty through my camera lens. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the symphony of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the bustling city life I was used to. But peace was not what I was destined to find that day. After several hours of hiking, I stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown path. It wasn't marked on any of my maps, a red flag that I foolishly ignored, blinded by the thrill of discovery. As I followed this mysterious trail, the air grew colder. The trees seemed to lean in closer, and an unsettling silence enveloped the woods. That's when I saw it, an abandoned village, hidden away from the world, a secret that was never meant to be uncovered. The path ended abruptly, as if it had been swallowed by the earth itself. Before me lay the remnants of what once must have been a bustling village. It was a haunting sight, a collection of dilapidated houses and structures that time had forgotten. The eerie silence of the village was oppressive, a stark contrast to the lively forest I had left behind. I stood at the edge, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Yet my curiosity pushed me forward. Each step I took seemed to stir the very soul of the village. The houses, though crumbling and covered in a thick blanket of ivy, stood as silent sentinels, guarding the secrets they held within. The windows, broken and dusty, seemed like vacant eyes staring back at me, giving me the unsettling feeling of being watched. Despite the bright daylight, a chilling shadow seemed to hang over the place, as if the sun itself was wary of touching this forgotten land. Compelled by a mix of fear and fascination, I ventured further. The streets were overgrown, nature reclaiming what was once hers. I could barely make out the cobblestones under the blanket of moss and weeds. Here and there, remnants of the villagers' lives lay scattered, a rusty bicycle leaning against a wall, a doll with a faded dress sitting on a doorstep, a teapot still resting on a stove in what looked like a kitchen through a broken window. These fragments of normalcy stood in stark contrast to the surreal atmosphere, reminding me that this place was once full of life. What intrigued me most were the symbols. They were everywhere, carved into door frames, etched onto the cobblestones, painted on the walls. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, a language or code that defied my understanding. Some were simple geometric shapes, others complex and intricate, weaving patterns that made my eyes dizzy. They seemed to pulsate with an energy, a message from the past that I couldn't decipher. I reached a central square, where a dried-up fountain stood. The statue in the middle, a figure with its face eroded away by time, held a bowl from which no water flowed. Surrounding the square were what seemed to be the main buildings, a town hall, a church with a broken bell in its tower, and a schoolhouse with desks still visible through the shattered windows. It was in the church that I found the most unsettling symbol of all. It was drawn on the altar, larger and more elaborate than the rest. A circle with intricate patterns and lines radiating outwards, it seemed to hold a significance, a power. As I stared at it, a cold breeze swept through the broken windows, carrying with it a whisper, a faint echo of a chant that once filled this place. I should have left then, should have heeded the warning signs that something was deeply wrong with this village. But the mystery ensnared me, drew me deeper into its grasp. I didn't know then that as the sun began to set, the true nature of this abandoned village would reveal itself, a truth far more terrifying than its ghostly appearance. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the village, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The transition from day to night seemed to awaken something within those ancient walls. The air grew colder, and a mist started to rise from the ground, creeping along the streets like a living entity. It swirled around my feet, obscuring the cobblestones and the eerie symbols that adorned them. The village, already shrouded in an unsettling aura, now took on an almost otherworldly quality. The fading light played tricks on my eyes, making the dilapidated buildings seem to shift and sway. I could no longer shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes following my every move from the shadows. The silence of the day was replaced by a new kind of quiet, a hushed anticipation, as if the village itself was holding its breath. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, weaving its way through the broken windows and cracked walls. But as I listened, the sound took on a more distinct quality. Hushed voices, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of voices speaking from the shadows. As dusk turned to night, the whispers grew in intensity, and I began to see them, shadows, darker than the night, flitting between the buildings. They were like smoke, formless and fleeting, yet there was an intention in their movements. It was as if the villagers, unseen during the day, were emerging in this twilight hour. My heart raced, a mixture of fear and disbelief coursing through me. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination fueled by the eerie setting. But the shadows grew bolder, their movements more deliberate. I saw them peer around corners, glide across windows, always just out of clear sight, but undeniably there. The realization hit me like a cold wave. I was not alone in this village. The villagers, or what remained of them, were still here, hidden in the shadows, unseen during the day. They were the whispers in the mist, the watchers in the dark, and as the night deepened, I understood a chilling truth. They were aware of me, an outsider who had trespassed into their forgotten realm. I should have left when I had the chance, when the sun still graced the sky and the shadows hadn't yet revealed their secrets. But now, as darkness enveloped the village, escape seemed like a distant dream. I was trapped in a place that didn't exist on any map, a place that time had forgotten, but which hadn't forgotten the living. As the night deepened, the village seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing around me in a cacophony of unintelligible chants. The shadows that flitted in the corners of my vision became more corporeal, taking on human-like forms that darted in and out of the mist. I felt a growing sense of dread, a realization that I was surrounded by entities that were neither fully alive nor dead. The events that unfolded next were like scenes from a nightmare. I saw figures, or what my mind interpreted as figures, standing in the windows of the houses, watching me with unseen eyes. Doors creaked open as I passed by, only to slam shut with a force that sent shivers down my spine. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, casting eerie patterns on the ground. I tried to convince myself it was all a hallucination, an overactive imagination fueled by the unsettling atmosphere. But the fear gripping my heart told me otherwise. The air grew colder, so cold that my breath formed clouds of vapor in front of me. I felt invisible fingers brush against my skin, a touch as light as spider silk but as chilling as death. I heard footsteps following me, always a few paces behind. Never close enough to see, but always there, a constant reminder that I was being pursued. In a desperate attempt to find shelter, I entered one of the houses. The door groaned open, revealing a scene frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture, a table set for a meal that was never eaten, toys left mid-play, the remnants of lives abruptly abandoned. But it was the walls that drew my attention. They were covered in photographs, faces of people I assumed were once villagers, their eyes scratched out, leaving black voids that seemed to stare into my soul. It was then that I heard the crying, a soft, mournful sound that seemed to emanate from the upper floor. Against my better judgment, I ascended the creaking staircase. The crying grew louder, more pained, leading me to a room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I was met with an empty room, the crying abruptly stopping as if silenced by my presence. Fleeing from the house, I found myself in the grips of an even more terrifying realization. The villagers were not just shadows and whispers. They were echoes of a past tragedy, forever imprinted on this place. Their hostility towards me, an outsider, was palpable. I was an intruder in their eternal night, a living anomaly in their world of shadows. The village itself seemed to turn against me. Paths twisted and turned, leading me in circles. The mist grew thicker, obscuring my vision, disorienting me further. I stumbled upon a playground, the swings moving by themselves, creaking eerily in the still air. A ball rolled towards me as if pushed by an invisible child. Laughter, distorted and chilling, filled the air, coming from all directions, enveloping me in a cacophony of madness. I tried to leave, to find my way back to the path that had brought me here, but the village wouldn't release me. Each time I thought I had found the way out, I ended up back at the village square, the statue in the fountain now appearing to watch me, its eroded face seemingly mocking my attempts to escape. Panic set in, a primal fear that I was never meant to leave this place. The shadows grew bolder, no longer content with watching from a distance. They encroached upon me, their forms becoming more distinct. Villagers, trapped in time, their faces twisted in anger and despair. They whispered accusations, their voices a blend of sadness and rage.
"You do not belong,"
they hissed.
"This is our world, our suffering. You cannot understand, cannot see."
I realized then that the villagers were not just remnants of a forgotten past. They were prisoners of their own tragedy, bound to this village by some unspeakable curse. And in their eyes, I was an invader, a living reminder of the world they had lost. As I stood in the center of the village square, the mist swirling around me, the whispers and cries reaching a fever pitch, I understood the depth of my predicament. I was caught in a web of spectral vengeance, a target of the villagers' eternal anguish. The village, with its decaying buildings and shadowy inhabitants, was more than a mere relic of the past. It was a nexus of unresolved pain and anger, a place where the line between the living and the dead was blurred. The events that followed were a blur of terror and confusion. Shadows lunged at me from the darkness, their touch cold and suffocating. I heard my own screams mixing with the ethereal wails that filled the air. I ran, not knowing where I was going, driven by the primal urge to survive. The village seemed to twist and contort around me, the buildings leaning in, the ground undulating under my feet. In my frenzied escape, I stumbled into the church. The moonlight streamed through the broken windows, casting long, haunting shadows across the pews. The altar, with its ominous symbol, seemed to pulsate with a dark energy. There, I experienced the most harrowing event of the night. The whispers coalesced into a single, powerful voice that echoed through the hollow space.
"You cannot escape!"
It boomed, a voice filled with centuries of sorrow.
"Your presence here has awakened our pain, a reminder of the life we once had."
Figures emerged from the shadows, their forms more defined now. Men, women, children, their eyes hollow, their expressions twisted in agony. They circled around me, their movements synchronized, a dance of the dead. They reached out, their hands inches from my skin, their touch promising a fate worse than death. In that moment, surrounded by the lost souls of the village, I felt a despair unlike any other. It was a despair born of the realization that these villagers were once living, breathing people, whose lives had been cut short by some unspeakable tragedy. And now, they existed in a limbo of their own making, unable to move on, bound to the remnants of their once thriving village. Their anger towards me was not just hostility. It was a manifestation of their unending grief, a grief that I had unwittingly stirred by trespassing into their domain. They saw in me the life they had been denied, a life that continued beyond the borders of their cursed village. The culmination of this nightmarish experience came when the figures converged upon me, their whispers turning into screams, a cacophony of pain that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I felt their cold hands upon me, pulling me into their world of eternal suffering. In that moment, I thought it was the end, that I would be consumed by their anguish, lost to the world of the living. But it was their touch that broke the spell. The contact with the living seemed to ignite a realization within them, a flicker of awareness that they were no longer part of the living world. For a brief moment, their expressions changed, softening into looks of sorrowful acceptance. The screams and whispers died down, the shadows receding, leaving me alone at the altar. I collapsed to the ground, my body shaking, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The church was silent now, the moonlight casting a serene glow over the empty pews. The figures were gone, vanished as if they had never been there. But the air still held a residue of their presence, a lingering sense of sadness that permeated the walls. As I gathered my strength to stand, I realized that the village, in its own twisted way, had imparted a lesson. It was a place trapped in a cycle of its own grief, a reminder of the fragility of life and the inevitability of death. The hostility of the villagers was not just a defense against an outsider. It was a reflection of their inability to accept their fate, to move beyond the tragedy that had befallen them. The experience in the church had drained me, both physically and emotionally. I felt a profound exhaustion, a weariness that seeped into my bones. But there was also a sense of urgency, a need to escape this place before the villagers returned, before the village claimed me as one of its own. I made my way out of the church, the village now eerily quiet, as if it was holding its breath. The mist had dissipated, and the moon shone brightly, casting a pallid light over the desolate streets. The haunting experiences of the night had changed me, leaving an indelible mark on my soul. I moved through the village with a newfound determination, the need to escape overriding my fear. The path that had eluded me earlier now seemed clearer, as if the village had finally decided to release me. With each step, I felt the oppressive atmosphere of the village lift slightly, the weight of the villagers' grief loosening its grip on me. As I reached the edge of the village, where the path led back into the forest, I took one last look at the abandoned buildings, the broken windows, and the eerie symbols. The village was once again silent, its secrets hidden beneath the veil of night. I stepped onto the path, the familiarity of the forest welcoming me back. The sounds of the night, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal animals, were a comforting reminder of the living world. The village, with its ghosts and shadows, seemed like a distant dream, a nightmare that had come to an end. But as I made my way back to civilization, I knew that the haunting experiences of that night would stay with me forever. The village, lost in time and shrouded in mystery, had revealed the thin line between life and death, a line that I had unwittingly crossed. Breathing heavily, with my heart pounding in my chest, I stepped back onto the path that had led me to this cursed village. The moon hung high, casting a dim light through the dense canopy of the forest. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. My mind was racing, trying to process the horrors I had witnessed, while focusing on the singular goal of escape. But the village was not done with me yet. The ghostly villagers, having momentarily retreated, began to emerge once again, more aggressive and determined than before. Shadows darted between the trees, surrounding me. Whispers filled the air, a chorus of voices that seemed to speak directly into my mind. "Stay," they hissed. "Join us in our eternal sorrow." I pushed forward, driven by a desperate need to leave this nightmare behind. But with each step, the path seemed to grow longer, more convoluted. It was as if the village itself was reshaping, bending the very fabric of reality to prevent my escape. Panic rose within me, a choking fear that I might never find my way out. In this moment of desperation, a flicker of insight sparked in my mind. The symbols. They had been a constant presence in the village, etched into its very essence. Perhaps they held the key to my escape. Recalling their intricate patterns, I realized that they might be more than mere decorations. They could be part of a ritual or a curse that bound the village to its spectral inhabitants. With this thought, I began to retrace my steps, moving back towards the heart of the village. The shadows grew more frenzied, their whispers turning into angry shouts. But I pushed on, determined to unravel the mystery of the symbols. As I reached the village square, the ghostly figures converged around me, their forms more distinct now in the moonlight. They were no longer just shadows, but apparitions of the villagers, their faces twisted in agony and rage. I stood in the center of the square, under the watchful gaze of the eroded statue, and took a deep breath. Drawing upon my memory, I began to sketch the symbols in the dirt at my feet, replicating the patterns I had seen throughout the village. The air grew charged with energy, a palpable force that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. The villagers circled closer, a barrier of spectral bodies that threatened to engulf me. As I completed the final symbol, a profound silence fell over the village. The moon seemed to shine brighter, casting a silver light that illuminated the square. I felt a shift in the air, a loosening of the oppressive atmosphere that had weighed upon me since my arrival. Looking up, I saw the villagers pause, their expressions changing from anger to confusion, and then to a kind of sad recognition. It was as if they were seeing me for the first time, not as an intruder, but as a fellow sufferer of fate's cruel whims. I spoke then, not knowing if my words would be understood.
I am not your enemy,
I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. I'm just a lost soul like you, but it's time for both of us to find our way out of this darkness. There was a moment of tense stillness. Then, slowly, the villagers began to fade. One by one, they dissolved into the night air, their whispers dying away, their forms disappearing like mist in the morning sun. The oppressive feeling lifted, and for the first time since I had entered the village, I felt a sense of peace. With the path now clear, I wasted no time. I hurried away from the square, following the now straight path that led out of the village. The forest welcomed me back, its familiarity a stark contrast to the alien world I had just left behind. As I emerged from the tree line, the first light of dawn was breaking on the horizon. The village, with all its shadows and secrets, seemed like a distant memory, a nightmare that had released its grip on me. But the experience had changed me, leaving a mark that I knew would never fully fade. I walked on, the rising sun warming my back, the sounds of the waking world a comforting reminder of my return to reality. The forest, once a gateway to the unknown, now felt like a protective barrier between me and the horrors of the night. Each step took me further away from the haunted village, and with every breath, I felt a growing sense of relief and freedom. But the escape was not without its toll. My mind was haunted by images of the ghostly villagers, their faces etched in sorrow and despair. The realization that I had witnessed the remnants of lives once vibrant but tragically lost weighed heavily on me. The village, a place out of time, had revealed the thin veil between life and death, a boundary I had unwittingly crossed. As the sun rose higher, casting its light through the trees, I reflected on the events of the night. The village, with its spectral inhabitants, was a testament to the enduring power of grief and the inability to let go of the past. In my quest for escape, I had unwittingly become a catalyst for their release, a final acknowledgement of their existence that allowed them to move on. The forest opened up, and I found myself back on the familiar trail that had led me to the village. The world around me was alive with the sounds of nature, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the haunted village. I felt a surge of gratitude for the simple beauty of the living world, a beauty I had taken for granted before my harrowing experience. As I made my way back to civilization, the memories of the village lingered in my mind. I knew that the experience would stay with me, a haunting reminder of the unseen world that exists just beyond our perception. But I also felt a newfound respect for the mysteries of life and death, and a deep appreciation for the preciousness of the present. I reached the outskirts of the town just as the town was stirring to life. The familiar sights and sounds of people going about their day were a balm to my weary soul. I had survived a night of unimaginable terror, and though I knew the memories would haunt me, I also knew that I had emerged stronger and more aware of the delicate balance of existence. The village, with its ghostly echoes and whispered secrets, would remain a hidden mark on the map of my life, a place of both fear and enlightenment. As I rejoined the flow of everyday life, I carried with me the lessons of the night, the importance of letting go, the power of acceptance, and the enduring connection between the past and the present. As I sat in the small, quaint cafe of the town, sipping a hot cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug in my hands felt grounding, a stark contrast to the cold, ghostly touches of the night before. The bustling sounds of the town's morning activities seemed surreal, almost like a different universe compared to the haunting silence of the village. I had escaped, but the escape felt narrow, almost miraculous, as if I had slipped through the fingers of a malevolent force that reluctantly let me go. Reflecting on the experience, my mind struggled to make sense of it all. The village, hidden and forgotten, had revealed a reality that was unimaginable, a place where the boundaries between life and death were blurred. The ghostly villagers, trapped in their eternal sorrow, had been a manifestation of a tragedy so profound that it tore the fabric of their existence, leaving them in a limbo between worlds. The unexplained mystery of the village lingered in my thoughts. What had happened to its inhabitants? Was it a natural disaster? A disease? Or something more sinister that had wiped them from the living world, yet trapped them in the other? The symbols, the rituals, the eerie atmosphere, they all pointed to a story that was lost in time, a story that perhaps was better left untold. I realized that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. The village, with its spectral echoes and haunting whispers, was a reminder of the unknown that lies just beyond our understanding. It was a place where the past was not just remembered but relived, a place where the echoes of lost lives were still resonating in the shadows. But the experience had also left a profound impact on me. It had shown me the depths of human sorrow, the pain of being unable to let go, and the importance of moving forward. The villagers, in their final act of release, had not only freed themselves but had imparted a lesson to me, the necessity of accepting the past and embracing the present. As I left the cafe, stepping out into the bright light of day, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, curiosity, and an unshakable sense of unease. The world around me seemed normal, yet I knew that beneath the veneer of normalcy lay mysteries untold, realities unseen. The twist, however, came when I reached into my pocket for my keys. Among them, I found a small object that I did not remember putting there. It was a stone, smooth and cold, with one of the symbols from the village etched onto its surface. A chill ran down my spine as I held it. How had it gotten there? Was it a mere coincidence, or had the village, in some inexplicable way, marked me? The symbol on the stone seemed to pulse under my gaze, a silent reminder of the night I had spent in the village. It was as if the village had left a part of itself with me, a token of my intrusion into its forgotten world. The realization dawned on me that the village, though I had left it behind, might not have fully released its hold on me. As I walked through the streets of the town, the stone in my pocket felt heavy, a physical manifestation of the experience that now weighed on my mind. I wondered if the village would call me back, if the ghostly whispers would echo in my dreams, if the shadows of the villagers would follow me in the world of the living. The experience at the village had changed me. It had opened my eyes to the mysteries that lay hidden in the shadows of our world, to the thin veil that separates life from death, and to the stories that are lost in the sands of time. But it had also left me with a lingering sense of connection to that forsaken place, a connection that was both unsettling and inexplicable. As I moved on with my life, the memories of the village remained, a haunting echo in the back of my mind. The stone, with its cryptic symbol, was a constant reminder that some mysteries are deeper than we can fathom, and some places, once visited, never truly let us go.